Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast. Today I'm your host Anna, my pronounce is she, her, and with me I have my friend Megan Hupin. She's a great associate art director at Lakshya Digital, and she kindly agreed to share her experiences about being an artist and her journey into the industry. Hey Megan, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. I'm also been playing
Oh,
Zelda.
I love Zelda. I haven't really played it ever because I don't have a Nintendo, but I've heard so many things about the games, and yeah, I wish to play. Anyway, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, like your career, your journey into the game industry?
Sure. So I've got 8 years experience in the games industry. I started off as an environment artist, and I've slowly grown the ranks to become an associate art director at Lakshya Digital. So my parkour was basically I started off as an intern, got hired, and I went from there.
So you studied at the uni, right? Like that's where you started your career, kind of.
So yeah, I did a bachelor's degree in 3D and animation, which is so basically I've always wanted to work in games in some shape or form, but initially I wanted to be a concept artist. So when it came around to being the age of picking unis, I had a bit of a look around at what courses were available, and there was this 3D and animation course that interested me, and I took it.
So, like with all your years of experience now, do you, how would you recommend people who want to take a arts course? How would you recommend them pick one? Like, what kind of things should they look at?
So the main thing to look out for is the skills that you're going to need for the job that you're sort of planning for yourself. And I think it's always good to have some kind of idea before you go to uni what you would like to do in future. I know for some people it's quite difficult because you're sort of still figuring yourself out at that age. You don't really know what you may want to do or or what you wouldn't. But picking unis, I think, is or like a course is a good way of figuring out if you do enjoy it or not, and sometimes it helps you narrow down the specialty you prefer. For me, for example, I picked a course that was specialized in animation and more specifically in films, but going through that course made me realize that animation wasn't for me, and I also specifically wanted to convert myself to video games rather than go in films.
Oh, that's interesting. So, like, I guess a university is like a good opportunity to try out different things. I imagine like a lot of universities allow you to transfer to different courses as well, which could be quite useful if you realize you don't quite like what you're currently doing. And like, do you think as an artist, because like there are obviously so many different disciplines, especially like in AAA, like concept art, environment art, prop art, all of those things, do you would you recommend people like they need to know exactly what kind of things they need to they want to specialize in, or is it something you can kind of figure out as your career progresses?
I would say it's good to have an idea of what you like to specialize in, but there will be people who just sort of organically find out what specialization suits them more. One of the good things about the uni course I picked was it was very sort of generalist. It taught us a lot of a very skill set. But once you do get into the industry, you might not actually have the role that you were expecting for yourself. And in some cases, it could be a blessing in disguise because you find out a new discipline that you didn't even think about that you really enjoy. Or in other cases, it might even be something that you thought you'd like, and it ends up being something that you kind of resent. And you can always try to change by changing uh, companies or by trying to do work on the site.
So like I guess like when you're just getting in the industry, it's kind of more about like, I just get an artist job and then you can transfer between disciplines if like, at least at the early stages, I guess, like, are the skills between different art disciplines like quite transferable?
I would say the skills are transferable, but what often happens is whatever first job you land tends to be what you stick to. So for me, for example, I started at Codemasters, which is a studio which at the time I didn't know wanted to specialize in racing games, um, which is not the genre of game I prefer, if I'm going to be honest. But they needed environment artists, and so I kind of got put into that category, and that's sort of where I stuck to. But I enjoyed it, so I didn't mind being sort of kept in that area. One of the downsides, though, is that as the years went on, and I was building up years of experience as an environment artist for racing games, every other studio is sort of jumping on the bandwagon with like, "Oh, you do racing games? Can you work on our racing games?" And if you want to get out, it becomes more and more difficult to prove that you can work on other genres, even though the skills are definitely transferable. But some people will really appreciate that you have sort of an area that you specialize in. So if it's not what suits you, then that's where I would recommend to take a step back and start building your portfolio in a different direction.
Like, kind of still continuing working on your own time and stuff. Did you ever have to do that, like have a full-time job and then also work on the portfolio to get into, like, I guess, a different role?
Probably not the best example in that realm. I've always been really lazy at building my art portfolio, mostly because I've been so busy working full time that I would get too tired and lazy to do any art pieces outside of work hours. But also because I was struggling to pinpoint which studios, which art styles I specifically wanted to be good at. And as it turned out, I sort of opened up myself more and more to managing, which made my art skills less and less important in that realm. And for more senior roles, at least the portfolio becomes more about the games rather than the portfolio itself.
Like, rather than individual pieces, I guess, in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, don't call yourself lazy. I feel like it's very important to call out that it's okay to not, like, it's a full-time job, right? Like, you don't see, I guess, like a doctor or like a lawyer just like doing their portfolio on the side. Like, it's hard. And I feel like there is this culture of like, oh no, you need to like work all the time. But it's important to have like a health, life, work balance and stuff. So I think it's good to call out that it's okay to not have time to build your portfolio on the side. But as so, like, you're now in the position of associate art director, and I imagine you've hired quite a few people, or at least been part of the interviews at some point. Is it right?
So, as part of my current role, I've been involved in interviewing people, but not specifically picking them myself. As in, as we're part of a really small team, which we've been building in Europe. So while my input was asked for, I've only had one direct report myself so far. However, with my current position of associate AD, I am sort of managing by proxy much larger teams. So, for example, in one game we had up to 100 artists, which I was technically in charge of, but there was 10 to 12 people reporting to me that were handling the rest of the team, basically.
Wow, that's quite impressive. That's a lot of people to handle. But I get, like, my question would be, from like the position of your experience, if you'd have to like hire an artist, like what kind of things do you feel like companies looking for, like in a portfolio or CV, like if a person wants to get like a starting job?
So, if we're looking at graduates and artists specifically, what we're usually looking for is obviously a good portfolio, but there's also like one special point I like to look at is soft skills, which become more relevant during the interview itself, but you can kind of show some of it during your portfolio pieces. So some of the examples I can think of would be sort of like your organization, your problem solving skills, and sort of showing your full knowledge of how games, if for example, if we were looking at game jobs, how game workflows work, and if you've made your assets efficiently, and if you've sort of thought about performance, if you thought about ways of quickly creating art or keeping it consistent. So it's not always just about creating beautiful art pieces, it's also about thinking of the functionality within the game, and how would that work if it was scaled.
I mean, people who are interested in it probably know the answer, but like I'm very curious because like for me as a game designer, and like I took the game design course and then went into the industry and I went to AAA, and like you're talking about the processes and like pipelines and kind of stuff, like I had no idea. Like when I started my first job, I was like, oh, so this is how you make games. Like I had kind of like game design concepts, but I had no idea how like things actually work. Like how do you work in the engine when there are like other 100 people working in the engine? Is this something that I guess an artist encounters as well, or are those kind of like thinking about a performance, like knowing what is performant and not performant, is it something universities teach you, or is it something you have to kind of learn on your own?
I would say it's definitely something you learn on the job, but it's something where, unfortunately, when you're in a hiring position, studios are expecting more and more to have people ready to work and hit the ground running. So the more you can give yourself a leg up by already being familiar with these concepts, then the better candidate you will be. So I know some unis are better at it than others, but if you do get the opportunity to work within teams or to sort of build a game with some friends or other graduates, it's important to try to test yourselves, sort of challenge yourselves by pretending it's a real project. And the putting constraints like that will help reveal the learnings that you would have in a full-time job.
Oh, that's very interesting. And like, can you, I guess if you run the game and it doesn't run, you know it's not performant, but like, are there kind of like some resources where you can get like a benchmark of how many polys needs to have? I don't know, like, or how the artist thing works.
I guess the best thing to do is to study existing games, to look at some of the GDC conference videos, and sort of seek out veterans of the industry just to learn as much as you can from them. I know in some cases there's even people who've sort of got assets out of AAA games, like extracted them. And if you just looked up close, you could see the compromises and the sacrifices they might have made just to keep it within budget. It's actually surprising how many games are really gorgeous if you look at the big picture, but if you start focusing on individual props, you find bugs or even just like blurry messes just because it doesn't matter. Everything else, like overall, it looks good.
Yeah, I guess like game dev is complicated. Like there are so many bugs. You're like, oh yeah, this is not. We're not gonna fix it just because there are more important things that actually like affecting the experience and stuff. Um, Another thing that I would be curious about is like, again, like for me with the university, it was like even though like we worked in a team and we had team projects and we made games, the experience of like, I guess my imagination of what a game designer is when I was at university was very, very different to what it actually was. So like whenever now I go to universities, I make sure to make a point to actually explain what I do, like what my job is. So like, is that similar for artists? Like, are there anything kind of that like, I guess a university promises you, but it's not quite true in the industry?
Definitely, I think nowadays unis tend to cater to game design, game specific courses, sorry, with kind of the aspiration that, oh, you'll be a game artist and you're going to do art your whole life and it's going to be the best thing ever. I don't really want to sort of tread on people's dreams, but there is a bit more to it than that. And one of the main things I found out from my own experience working as an artist was that you need to be a good artist so that you can tell what makes good art and how to improve it overall, or how to build it quicker, or how to build it more efficiently. But the bottom line is that internal studios need less and less hands-on artists. It's more important to be good at managing other people, and also there's an increase, especially in AAA studios, with outsourcing. So you may not get to do as much art as you'd want because it gets shipped to another studio.
So I guess you're saying there are a lot of companies like outsourcing other work. So how much, I guess, of a percentage it is? But like, obviously we don't know like per company, but like, I guess an average from your experience, like with the intent is like, can you even get a job as a junior artist, or is it like all outsourcing and you need to kind of go into outsourcing for that?
So there's definitely still jobs as junior artists, but it'll be mostly in indie companies, or it'll be in larger AAA companies in the role of helping set the standards and the higher level artistic decisions. So I would say indie studios tend to need people to be generalists so that they can, do the entire artwork themselves. Whereas AAA studios will need people to be more specialized, and they'll usually need sort of leading experts of different categories. So, for example, foliage or vehicles or characters and such. And what does get outsourced usually is more about pre-production and also preparing the art style for the outsourced studio. So it requires more of a critical eye and the ability to judge and create a good prototype rather than just having thousands of assets and just going through them.
That's interesting. And like, how does the roles progress? I would imagine it's like it depends on like whether indie or AAA and stuff. But like with your experience, I guess in AAA, what is the difference between you being like a junior artist, a mid-level artist, like a more senior, I guess? Like, what do you do?
So I would say generally what will happen is a junior artist is, if someone is fresh out of uni, will get more the opportunity to create art to begin with, because it's about building your skills. It's about learning all the critical aspects of game development. What will usually happen is that if you're good at these things, will need you to do more high level decision making, such as prototyping levels, or working alongside game designers, concept artists, to create the mock-up of new games. And also there's just a general aspect of mentoring and training new people, and that's usually what sort of gets you to senior level or above, where it's more about managing the team and also participating in breaking up the work into multiple teams to get the work done, as opposed to hands-on artwork.
So yeah, I guess it's like it's very similar to any other discipline. Like the higher you go, the less actual work you do. And like going back a little bit to like outsourcing, since it's quite, I guess, a lot of artists work in outsourcing. How much different is that from working for a studio that makes the actual game?
Wow, bit of a bombshell, that one.
Sorry.
So I would say it's kind of like two worlds, because I think you need to have worked on in an internal team to begin with, sort of like on the actual title, to gain the experience required. But when you shift to outsourcing, it's a lot more about being able to produce a lot of work. And also there's just so many, because you work for clients, so you change contracts quite regularly. You have to be really on point in terms of the latest technologies and the latest skills, but also you have to be ready to just start from scratch every time with each client's sort of a game style or whatnot. But the benefit is that you get to work on so many different games. Whereas, for example, before I went into outsourcing, I worked on 4 racing titles, and that was the point where I needed a change. I needed to leave the studio because I knew they wouldn't work on anything else. So outsourcing has that benefit that you just get to have your finger in a lot of pies.
That's interesting because I don't know why, but I thought that getting a job in outsourcing would be like easier than in an internal team, and you would want to start with outsourcing, especially because you can kind of like work on different projects. But I guess it also makes sense because if you're specializing on a specific project and you have a set of skills, it's kind of like easier because you can develop them rather than having to like work on so many different art styles and this kind of stuff. How would you recommend people then like develop their skills, like if they do want to go there, because like there are obvious like benefits to it, as you're saying, like working on different projects and stuff, like pigeonholing yourself into like a specific genre?
I'd say the main things to, if you want to work into outsource specifically, what will most likely be expected of you is to be able to understand the client's vision and also discuss it and mentor the rest of your team to follow it. So you have to get really good at getting a more general understanding of visual styles and also knowing how to adapt the style to the game. So there'll be games, for example, if you took mobile, you have to compromise the quality for performance. If you worked on AAA, like God of War type games, it's all about the quality and not so much about how much time you spend on the asset. So it's good to try to vary your own skill set to sort of prepare for that role, but you also need to be more capable and more interested in managing rather than hands-on work. Although saying that, there are outsourcing studios, sorry, that I know of who hire specifically seniors and principal artists only, and they're quite small teams. And the reason for this is because they hire people who are capable of taking a really vague brief from a client and produce the benchmark pieces that the client needs. So there are studios where basically you need to be a beast of an artist because that's what the client needs. They just need an extra pair of hands. They're really good at art without much hand holding. And then there's outsourcing studios that require more of an army of artists and then a few managers at their head.
And that's interesting what you said about like the brief and being able to, as a principal, being able to take a brief, like a vague brief. So like, how do you work with the briefs as an artist? Like, what does it look like?
What does an asset brief look like, you mean?
Like how, I guess, yeah, like what does it, my question is more like you as an artist, you get the brief. What do you do with this? Like, how do you produce an asset from it? Like, what are your steps? What do you think about? How do you turn, like, if you have a vague brief, what do you do with it?
It's a tough question. So generally, what will happen is that clients will have they'll have a game in mind. Some of them will be very early stages, so they'll just have a rough art bible, maybe some broad lines like, oh, it's a first-person shooter, it's sci-fi. And then there'll be clients who have much more specific briefs because they have a workflow in place. And then it'll become more about try-count benchmarks, texture sizes, and or they even have like set workflows, like they have specific shaders you need to use. But when it comes to vague briefs, it's you need to sort of analyze it and interpret it as if you were part of the team. So you have to ask yourself, well, if it's this kind of game, then how good does it need to look? How close will the player get to it? How does it need to work? Does the player interact with it? Yes or no? Does it break? So there's a lot of elements like that, but also It depends if it's what you'd call a hero piece, or just like regular props. Hero piece being like it's super important and it just needs to look amazing. Whereas there'll be cases where clients are tight on budget and tight on time, and you have to find the best ways to author the assets that in a quick way, but also like if efficiently, um, at the quality that they want.
That's interesting. Um, you're also like saying about like managing people and stuff. How did you find it transitioning from an artist into being more of a art director? What was like kind of the most challenging things?
I'd say that kind of happened naturally for me. It was mostly because I was very interested in communicating in with the other teams. So you sometimes find the need to just initiate conversations and train new people just because you happen to be the most experienced person on the team there, and you have a bunch of graduates who just joined. So the sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. So basically, what you do need to do in terms of managing is be able to be organized, and also just solve problems and be proactive, and spot them before they happen, which usually, you'll get better at it with experience. But I know that some people are just not fit for managing or not interested in managing, whereas you don't have to have 10 years behind you to be a good manager, or have the good, what's the word, sort of the right mindset to become one at the very least. If you like talking to people, and if you like teaching what you know, however little it may be, then that's the sort of the sign that you should maybe look into management.
It's interesting that you said like you don't have to have 10 years of experience, like because like I personally am trying to become a manager, like a lead game designer, and like one of the things that like my mentality has always been like, oh, you need like a completely different set of skills, like it's more of a soft skills rather than technical practical skills. So like yeah, you don't need this kind of 10 years of experience. But then my mentor mentioned that at least like as a in the design discipline as a lead designer, like if someone goes ill or someone decides to quit or something goes wrong, you kind of have to jump on, and like you have to be able to perform anyone's job on the team to support them. Is that kind of similar for the artists then as well, like, or is it completely different?
I guess that would depend how high up you are, and also what scale of a studio you work for. I would say that it, to some extent, as a lead or a above associate AD, etc., you need to know what the work entails, enough to be able to talk about it, obviously, and enough to give feedback to people. But if you've escalated to the role of manager and you've not done art in years, chances are you can't really just jump in and do any of it when your direct reports are off. So it's more about knowing people's strengths and weaknesses, and finding the right people to delegate tasks to, but also growing people to be able to do the work that's required.
But then, like, wouldn't you say that you kind of need that experience? Like, not necessarily like 10 years, but you still, like, it comes with time, like, this understanding of, like, what good art is and, like, what different disciplines do. Or is it something you can kind of fast track into?
Well, I'd say if you're going to be a manager, you definitely need to have enough years of hands-on work yourself to even begin to understand what the tasks will be. But I think once you've become a manager, and you're sort of not getting to do hands-on work anymore, you'll slowly, um, sort of, well, first of all, because we're in an ever-evolving industry, it's hard to stay up to date. But if you worked as an artist yourself at least a few years, you get at least a foundation of what will be the challenges if you scale it. So when you become a manager and you have people reporting to you, it's more about keeping an eye on them and their ability to provide the work that you need, rather than knowing how to do it yourself. It doesn't, like, especially when you take environment, and I'm sure it could be said about other disciplines, but there's just too many skills to have. It's impossible to be able to do all of them in a lifetime, especially in AAA games, where not only you need to be so for example, if we took a character artist, there'll be people who can do the character models but they can't do hair, and then there'll be people who can do hair, but like they do hair so well that nobody wants them to do anything else. So when you are thinking of doing managing, you can't possibly know all these various skills because you didn't have the time, and we're not going to wait for people to have 30 years of experience before promoting them to managers. It's more about just being able to help others get to that point.
Do you have any, like, if someone aspires to be like more of a managerial role, like an art director or like a lead artist, do you have any advice to them of like what specific skills they should be looking at? Like, how do you get on that track?
Can you repeat that question, please? Sorry.
If someone wants to be a manager, it's kind of like their aspiration. Like maybe they've started as an artist already, and they kind of, oh, this is my calling. Wanting to become like an art director or like a lead artist. Do you have any recommendations of kind of how to get there, how to get on the track, what skills to hone, and this kind of stuff?
So I would say leads and art directors across studios the responsibilities required may vary. Um, so it's also important to know what you want to do specifically, because there'll be people who, for example, they might think of as art director as someone who has the vision and who draws the concept, sort of the prototype concept, and other people will think more of an art director as the someone who oversees all the different art teams and who just kind of joins them together and oversees more. And there'll be art directors who are also very sort of schedule focused and deadline focused, and who are better at promoting others to sort of do R&D and find the right style, as opposed to having it themselves. So it's probably a bit of a tangent there, but for leads, it can be a bit similar, because lead artists will in some cases have to be very specialized in a certain aspect of art. So if I took environment art, there'll be lead vehicle artists, there'll be lead architecture artists, or props or foliage, vegetation overall. And that could be from hands-on experience on said aspects. So if you took Guerrilla Games Horizon Zero Dawn game, they had a dedicated vegetation team. And so I would assume their lead was someone who had a lot of experience making vegetation themselves, to then quality check and teach new things to their team. Whereas there's other studios where a lead artist has to be more of a general overseer of various departments, probably more in smaller companies, where it's more about scheduling estimates, licensing paperwork, the less fun stuff. But some people are really good at it, so it kind of depends where your skills lie. And I think the same can be said about art directors. Essentially, you have to figure out if you're more of a bureaucratic / office politics person, or more of a dreamer of an artist in that sense.
That makes sense. I guess like every company would have their own definition of what each role does to an extent. Like I guess there are always going to be similarities, but still, it very much depends. So, what kind of art director are you? Are you like more of an overseer? I would assume so, like since you're outsourcing.
Yeah, so as an outsource AD, it will mostly be about sorting out communications with the client and understanding their vision as opposed to coming up with one. So my role mainly consists of interpreting what the clients want from us and also filling in the gaps by learning to know their games and their style to then better lead the my team to produce what they want. And it's also about tracking inefficiencies and problems that could be happening. Could be as silly as like perforce issues, infrastructure licenses, costs, and just trying to find better ways to make the company, lucrative, and also grow the artists so they're not just uh, so they're not just constantly just making asset after asset without necessarily learning new skills.
Oh, so like as a creative, oh, why do I keep saying that? As an art director, do you also kind of like, I guess, make, I don't know, educate, not educational programs, but you know what I mean? Like, do you kind of like choose courses people should go to and skills they need to develop?
It's actually funny you say that because it's exactly what we need to do. Basically, we have to be better at achieving the right visual targets. So it also means we need to identify the strengths and the weaknesses of the team to then teach new processes, new workflows, and new styles. So we have to think of things on a company level, which is how do we train people quicker to be efficient on various projects? What skills come useful on multiple projects as opposed to just this company really likes ZBrush artists or something. And we have to find better ways of educating our teams and also minimize like repeated mistakes. So my company specifically, I'm not very involved in it, but they have a school because so my company is based in India for people who don't know, which means we don't have a big gaming industry in India to back ourselves, and the talent, the artists that we get don't have experience in the games industry. So Lakshya implemented a school of their own to teach those skills which are missing from, say, Western artists you might hire from previous companies. So it will depend on the company you work for, but you always have to identify ways of improving the art, the art as a big picture, and that could be like you said, new technologies, new software, or just um, the subjective reasons why the art isn't how you want it to be.
That's very interesting. And I guess like you never kind of stop learning as well. Like as an artist, there are always things that you need to go. You would probably be like a good teacher at university as well, with all your experience building up other people's art. Uh, do you miss it at all? Like not making assets, I guess.
It's kind of funny because it's sometimes I do, and there's a few, like, especially when we have downtime, I'll just make an asset just to keep myself busy, and that's when I remember I don't actually miss doing hands-on art that much. The reason for that is because making props and making assets can be a bit more like a repeated task, if I may say, like a bit like if you were working at a factory and just building a yet another table, and you don't feel like you're learning new skills. So the thing I really miss, and I realize now, is just being involved in game, like creating a game itself. So having participating in the vision, talking with various departments, sorry, and pitching my own ideas. But I don't miss being an artist. That I'm completely content with other people who are much better at than me, uh, just following the instructions. So, for example, I may review an asset, and I might be better at pinpointing what would make it look better. But I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm happy having someone else do the artwork.
It's interesting. Maybe a bit of a spicy question, but like as an artist, how much creativity do you have? How much of it are you just like doing the same table over and over?
Specifically in outsourcing or in all
No,
like overall?
in games, like when you actually like in both outsourcing and in the internal, like are there differences between how much creative freedom you get?
That I would say that that would depend on the scale of the game, but I would say if you're in a company that has concept artists and art directors and such, chances are the creativity will be quite sort of reduced, because there'll be someone who's already figured out what assets will be needed and how they need to look, and that's part of the sort of the beauty of AAA is that everything is sort of ship tight and everyone has a plan and everyone knows what to do. And I know that some people really enjoy that. They like just being told, do this, do that, and you have like you'll have a brief with a concept art of the asset, and you just make it, and you don't have to question it. Um, Being creative is, I guess, more in the line. If you were working in indie games, but also obviously if you were an art director. But I'd say you can become creative in other ways, though. You can be better at coming up with new systems to create lots of art, but quicker or in a consistent quality. Or just uh, I guess just reading into the briefs and the concepts given and adding an extra layer to it as well.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I've never actually thought about it, but I think it's like very important to be aware of like how much of a creativity it is when like picking specialization and like what kind of company you go for. I guess something to look out for. Um, do you feel like you like if you ever decided that you actually love making assets, do you feel like you can transition back into like more of a like a principal role from something managerial, or like your skills kind of go away and the world moves too fast?
There's a little bit of that. I think I can definitely still do art. I can still I've tried to not let myself get rusty, but usually what the expectations from a principal role is to be able to play around with like the most unknown processes, and even come up with new ones, like playing around with Unreal Engine's nanite system or Houdini. um, so it kind of, if you wanted to become a principal artist after you've been a manager for a few years, I think it would very much feel like going back to the bottom, simply because you are going to need to brush up your skills again. Um, and for principals, usually you have to be extremely good at least one discipline, um, just to be able to produce. So, for example, if you had like an environment artist, a principal would be expected to set the quality at the beginning of a project. So you're the one producing the most difficult pieces of work. Um, and so the quality bar has to be really high.
So I guess the short answer is like no, you can't really. You'll have to go to like mid level or something to build it back up.
Yeah, I would say it's a difficult transition because principal art versus lead is one is a manager and the other one is an artist, but times 10 essentially. So unless you've managed to stay extremely on top of your game as a lead artist, transitioning to principal will be a rough ride.
And like for a principal, I guess you were saying like you need to specialize in like Houdini or like nanite and stuff. Like I know for like a game design at least, it's like you're an expert in like a specific like you're so good in this one thing, and that's why you're a principal kind of deal. Is it the same for artists as well?
Definitely, there'll be people who are specialized in substance designer generation, for example, or there'll be marvelous designer experts. That's like cloth sim. Um, the they're the pioneers of each discipline. I would say in most large companies, if they did have like a specific team for each type of assets or like foliage, there'll be, so if you had a foliage team, there's probably going to be a speed tree expert there, and if there isn't, the rest of the team will probably struggle to have a mentor to learn from to produce really great trees.
Yeah, like that's interesting. I guess like as a principal, you would be mentoring people more than a lead would, right? Because like you would have the skills that they need to learn.
Yeah, it's actually funny you mention it that way, because I think both the leads and principals mentor the same artist probably most of the time, but I think the principal will be more of a hands-on mentor who knows the technical skills and the artistic skills to pass on, whereas the lead, what I would expect at least, is more of a manager and soft skills expert, and uh, also someone who will keep track of your productivity better than the principal.
Yeah. And like transition kind of from this back into like soft skills. Artists like interact with other departments a lot. Like how does that kind of look like, and what are your tips on like what kind of soft skills do you need, I guess?
From my experience, environment artists are probably the ones who have the most to do with every other department, simply because um, where the work you produce will deal with physics, will deal with the level design. There'll be rendering constraints or licensing constraints, gameplay functionalities. I think it's very important when you're creating art, as an environment artist, sorry, specifically, is to just reach out and to speak to and to get to know other departments from your company, simply because you don't know if this lamp you're going to make could be better if you got like a rendering artist or a technical artist create a new shader for you, or you don't know if this new asset you've been given would be better with some gameplay functionality if you ended up talking to a game designer about it. So we're usually blamed for a lot of bugs because everything we work on has some sort of impact on someone else's work. But it's also really fun to be able to, just making the assets that they need to. Whereas if you're an environment artist, whatever you make is everywhere else in the game.
So I guess like a lesson: if you don't want to talk to people, don't become an environment artist. We're starting to have like ridiculous technical issues, so I think I'm gonna wrap up here. That would be best for everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Do you have kind of like any last points you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. I guess one thing I was thinking of earlier during our discussion is that so basically when you're thinking of working in the games industry, and or building your portfolio, the best thing to do is to try to figure out what it is specifically you want to do and make your portfolio about that. So if there's a particular company that you really want to work for, make your portfolio about them and them only. Obviously, you're probably going to apply for multiple jobs, so it's best to have separate portfolios if you can, because that's what employers will be really interested in. And other than that, try to stay open and try multiple disciplines if you can, and because that's the best way to figure out what you do like doing. And if you're not happy with what you're working on currently, then that's the best time to go back to the drawing board and work on something to change disciplines. So, yeah.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. And this concludes our episode on the Game Dev London podcast about an artist's journey, I guess, and what the work entitles. Thank you so much for joining me today. You can find more podcasts and a lot more information at our website, gamedev.london, and also join our community at Discord to find like-minded people, share your interests with them, and get more advice. Thank you, everyone. See ya same time next week. Bye.